You ever feel like the forest is alive? Not in the way nature documentaries describe it, teeming with harmless wildlife, but in a way that feels personal. As if the trees have eyes, as if the wind is whispering secrets meant only for you. What if those secrets weren't imagined? What if the forest wasn't just alive but awake, aware of your presence, and watching? Tonight's story will take you into the depths of such a forest, where reality blurs, and fear becomes a companion you can't shake. Are you ready to hear the tale of the beckoning woods? The story begins with a group of friends: Jenna, Ryan, Mia, and Alex. They weren't thrill seekers, not really. They were ordinary 20-somethings who worked mundane jobs and looked forward to their occasional getaways. This time, the destination was Deepwood Forest, a sprawling, ancient woodland famous for its dense canopy and the legends that surrounded it. The forest had a reputation: stories of people disappearing, strange sounds echoing at night, and eerie sightings that defied explanation. But to Jenna and her friends, these were just stories. Urban legends designed to keep kids from wandering too far. So when they booked a weekend at a secluded cabin deep within the woods, they didn't think twice. The cabin was charming in its rustic way, nestled between towering pines and surrounded by a thick carpet of moss. The air smelled of earth and pine, and the silence was punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. It was perfect, or so they thought. Their first day was uneventful. They spent it hiking, exploring trails, and laughing over exaggerated tales about the forest's supposed hauntings. By nightfall, they were sitting around a crackling fire outside the cabin, roasting marshmallows and swapping ghost stories. The stars above were brilliant, unmarred by city lights, and for a while, they felt entirely at ease. But then, as the fire dwindled and the night grew colder, Ryan mentioned something odd. "Did anyone else notice how quiet it is out here?" he asked, his voice low, as if speaking louder might shatter the stillness. "What do you mean?" Mia replied, frowning. "I mean, there's no sound. No crickets, no owls, nothing." The group fell silent, listening. He was right. The forest, usually alive with nocturnal activity, was unnervingly quiet. The kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive, like a blanket thrown over the world. "It's probably nothing," Jenna said, trying to dismiss the unease creeping into her chest. "Maybe the wildlife is just sleeping or something," but none of them truly believed that. They retreated into the cabin soon after, locking the doors and windows out of habit rather than necessity. The unease lingered, but exhaustion won out, and one by one, they drifted off to sleep. It was around 2 a.m. when Jenna woke up. At first, she wasn't sure what had stirred her. The cabin was pitch black, the kind of darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But then she heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging against wood. It was around 2 a.m. when Jenna woke up. At first, she wasn't sure what had stirred her. The cabin was pitch black, the kind of darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But then she heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging against wood. They both froze, listening. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was making the noise wanted to be heard. "What the hell is that?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but I'm not going out there to find out." By now, Ryan and Alex had woken up too. The four of them huddled together in the small living room, debating their next move. Ryan, ever the skeptic, insisted it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. "They're curious creatures," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Raccoons don't make sounds like that," Alex countered. "That's too intentional." The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that was even more unnerving. They waited, holding their breaths, but nothing happened. After an hour of tense waiting, they convinced themselves it was nothing and went back to bed. But the next morning, they found deep, jagged marks etched into the wooden door, as if something, or someone, had been trying to claw their way inside. Unease settled over the group like a storm cloud, but they tried to brush it off. Maybe it really had been an animal, they reasoned. After all, they were in the middle of the woods. They decided to go for another hike to distract themselves. The trail they chose that day was less maintained, more overgrown. It twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forest than they had intended to go. The trees here were older, their gnarled roots snaking across the path like the veins of some ancient, slumbering beast. As they walked, the sense of being watched grew stronger. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of their necks, but it soon became impossible to ignore. The forest seemed darker here, the canopy so thick that sunlight barely penetrated. Shadows danced and shifted, playing tricks on their eyes. "Guys, I think we should head back," Jenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, this place is giving me the creeps," Mia agreed. But when they turned to retrace their steps, the path was gone, or rather, it had changed. The trail they had been following now led in a direction none of them recognized. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. They tried to use their phones for navigation, but there was no signal. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees pressing closer, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And then they heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. They froze, their eyes darting around, searching for the source. But there was nothing, just the oppressive shadows and the suffocating silence. "What the hell was that?" Alex whispered, his voice shaking. "Let's just keep moving," Ryan said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "We'll find our way back." But the forest had other plans. As they pushed forward, the growls grew louder, more insistent. The trees seemed to shift and move, their branches clawing at the group as if trying to keep them there. Time lost all meaning, and the sun never seemed to set or rise. It was as if they were trapped in a perpetual twilight, caught in the forest's grasp. One by one, strange things began to happen. Mia swore she saw figures darting between the trees, just at the edge of her vision. Ryan heard whispers calling his name, beckoning him deeper into the woods. Alex found himself inexplicably drawn to a clearing where the ground was littered with bones, bleached white and gleaming like grotesque jewels. By the time they stumbled upon the cabin again, or what they thought was the cabin, it was night. But something was off. The cabin looked older, more decrepit, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Against their better judgment, they went inside. The interior was unrecognizable, the furniture was rotting, the walls were covered in strange, indecipherable symbols, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. But the most horrifying thing was the mirror. It was an old, ornate mirror, cracked and tarnished, hanging crookedly on the far wall. As they approached, their reflections twisted and distorted, their faces elongating, their eyes hollow and sunken. "This isn't right," Jenna said, backing away. "We need to leave, now." But the forest wasn't done with them. As they turned to flee, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The growls returned, louder and more menacing, accompanied by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. What happened next would haunt them forever. The footsteps stopped right outside the room they huddled in, the air thick with the anticipation of something terrible. A hand, pale, with unnaturally long fingers, curled around the edge of the doorway. Before they could scream, the world went black. Hours, or maybe days later, Jenna woke up alone in the woods, the memories of what happened fractured and incomplete. The cabin was gone, replaced by a ring of blackened trees. Her friends were missing. But the forest was still there, and it was still watching. If you ever find yourself drawn to Deepwood Forest, turn back. Some places are meant to remain untouched. If you don't listen, you might not come back. And if you do, you'll never be the same. Want to hear what happens next? Click on the next video, it's even darker than this one.